Ladies and gentlemen, BC here, Alden again, Team BC University coming at you with a 1-2 punch. We're going to talk about some more objections today. Like, I'm looking for a neighborhood specialist. Now, I have to ask Alden again, welcome back to the show.
Appreciate the invite.
Do you hear this a lot or no? And it could be anything. It could be I'm looking for a luxury specialist. I'm looking for a neighborhood specialist. I'm looking for a fill in the blank, like a custom home specialist. Do you hear variations of this at all, ever?
It's probably, I would say, a top 5 objection that I hear, but it's not one that comes up. It probably comes up one every 7 or 8 appointments that I go on.
Okay, so fairly like infrequent. It's like 10% of the time, maybe a little bit more, you'll hear this.
Yeah,
right?
Maybe 20% is probably fair to say.
Okay, so let's break this thing down. We can get into some dialogues here in a second, but I know where this comes from, but I want to ask you, what's your opinion or your knowledge in regards to this? Like, why would somebody say that? I'm looking for a neighborhood specialist.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because, I used to always let it get to me when I was, initially first in the business. And then I realized, and I guess to answer your question from where it came from, or before I answer that part of it, is I would end up taking listings from people who previously used the neighborhood specialist, people who know the exact neighborhood and they do all the deals there, and they weren't selling the properties. And I would come around and take them and sell them, and people would be blown away by it. I think people just, in my opinion, it comes down to the root cause of like people just want to feel that their stuff is special. Mm-hmm. And so they really want somebody who knows the neighborhood, not understanding the real estate process that It doesn't matter if you sell in this state, that state, no matter what, you can gather all the the information from the internet, and you don't need a specialist.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So not sure if I answered your question, but that's
you did, because I brought up on another episode that, back in the day, people would go to the local real estate office and only that office could sell it. Right. So it kind of stems from that. And typically you hear this. I hear this more from like expireds, right? Where it's like, I need that person who might know this intricate detail or have access to the special buyers. Like when I was in California, I would hear, oh, I want the guy or the girl who has access to all the buyers from China who are paying cash, because I was like a rumor going around that everything was selling cash to these Chinese buyers. And then when I looked into it, it was like 8% of the transactions were going cash to these buyers. I'm like, dude, it's like 9 out of 10 aren't. They're getting a mortgage. So, part of it is like fluff and media. The other part is just that old school type of thinking. Is that kind of like the wavelength that you're on?
1,000%.
Yeah. So, okay, you hear that, right? Now, do you hear that more on the phone before the appointment or at the appointment?
I'll hear both.
Yeah.
I'll hear both, because I feel like a seller who has that type of frame of mind is going to want to stick to that, whether even if you set the appointment with them, they're going to usually bring it up again at the listing appointment, how that's really what they're looking for. Someone who knows their area, knows what's going on, and can really sell it to the buyers.
Yeah. How do you go about reframing that and kind of either handling it directly or kind of deconstructing that way of thinking from the actual client?
Yeah, I use the objection that you always tell us. It's, the reframe of, I'm really glad you brought that up, man. I'm assuming you're asking me that because you're looking for someone who is qualified to sell your house. Is that correct?
100%. I want to know that you can sell it for sure.
Yeah. And based on that, the process of selling a home, do you know what it's actually going to take, or the most important factors when it comes to getting your home sold and getting it sold for the most money possible? Do you know what those are?
Please share.
Yeah. Number one is going to be, it needs to be in perfect condition, meaning as soon as a buyer walks in there, it's clean, it's organized, and it looks great, and it smells good. Make sense?
Yep.
Number two is it needs to be easy to show. So if a buyer is coming in from out of town, we need to make sure that buyer has access to it in the time frame, because they could be here for, Sunday evening at 8 o'clock, and we need to make sure we can get them in, because that might be that one buyer is going to pay you the most money. You with me?
Yep. Got it.
Number three is we need to make sure we have the best pictures. And as you probably saw in my listing packet, I have the best photographer over here in Raleigh. She does a great job, and we're going to make your home look as good as possible online, because where do buyers start their search?
Online.
Absolutely. And the last thing, most importantly, do you know what that is?
I don't know.
It's the price. We need to make sure that your house is priced so perfectly that when the buyer walks through the door, looks good, smells good, it's organized, and it's priced so perfectly that there's not a question of which house they want to offer on it. How much do we want to pay for your property? Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
And that's typically the process. That's more of what I'll go through at the listing appointment. I'll usually defer it to the appointment when I'm on the phone.
Yeah, and deferring, for those of you who might not know that word, is basically saying, hey, we'll talk about that at the appointment, right? Instead of addressing it there and getting into this, jujitsu battle back and forth with them, you're just saying, hey, we'll address that. I'm making note of it. Is there anything else you would want me to cover specifically? You can kind of take note of it and defer it for the appointment. Now, what you said is spot on. I say something just like that. Or there's other ways you can handle it too, right? Because like I said, I get that from expireds. So if I was to say that, I would say the last agent. That's a great question, ma'am or sir. The last agent that you used, were they the neighborhood specialist? And in most cases, they tell me, well, that's what they said, or well, that's what we thought, right? So it's like, so you have proof now that using the neighborhood specialist doesn't work.
I use that all the time as well. That's a very powerful one.
Yep. Now, I think people struggle with that one because it's a lot more direct, and we're so because even though, like, let's say that was our friend we had to tell that to, we would say that no problem. It's like, you dummy, that guy just lied to you and said he was a specialist, right? Yeah. But when it's a stranger, suddenly we have this hesitancy. But the top salespeople will say the truth, how it needs to be said, when it needs to be said, right? Because even if they take it a little harsh, it has to be said for the point to be made. And fine-tuning your delivery, of course, will help with that, but it has to be said. Otherwise, what do? We do what most agents do, and we dance around the topic and try to come up with all this nonsense, and all it does is worsen our position, huh?
100%. And what happens when you dance around? What happens when you don't face objections head on is the person at the end of the presentation will say, oh, that everything you said sounds great. You know what? Let me think about it. I'll get back to you. And then they never call you back.
Yep. Which has happened to me.
You didn't. Yeah. Yeah, me too. Because you didn't dig out or attack the root cause of the thought process and reframe it so that they can actually see why. Mm-hmm. It's important for them to be able to see why the local realtor does not really matter.
Yep. And I think the key with like our approach and what we do is not only are we great salespeople, but we educate people in the process. And that ultimately is what creates the most trust and confidence in you and bridges that gap to get people to choose you versus somebody else. Would you agree with that?
1,000%. When they know that they can trust you, everybody has a bad perception of realtors. Even if you don't learn the scripts, if you're just truthful with people, you'll have a leg up on most real estate agents by far.
Yeah, I love it, bro. Cool. Any final thoughts or anything?
No, attack the objections head on, and you'll have much better luck at your next appointment.
For sure. All right. If you guys need any help, I recently released the Agagi. You saw that. The link is below. My website, all that stuff you'll find in the description. All right. Team BC out. Peace.